Good afternoon and welcome to Parliament Street. The battle to save Clifton from becoming a gated community where Bahamians would have had to have an appointment to visit their ancestors' graves and where the ruins of a loyalist plantation would not be accessible to the public was a fierce one, involving a wide cross-section of people. The ultimate victory led to the creation of the Clifton Heritage Authority and the Clifton Heritage Park, preserving this historic corner of New Providence for generations to come. This is Patty Roker. My guest today, Keod Smith, is one of those who was involved in the fight for Clifton. Recently, Mr. Smith has taken exception to some statements in the international and local press about that fight and also about the future of the sea around Clifton. He will explain why, 14 years after the battle was first joined, there is still unrest about this wonderful, wild, historic place and what he believes should be done to continue to preserve it for us all. Starting around 5 o'clock, we'll be taking your questions. Our numbers are 356-4509, 356-4510, and for the Family Islands, our toll-free number is 1-242-300-0156. We'll be back after these messages. And here we are on Island FM on Parliament Street on this lovely Sunday afternoon. And this is Patty Roker, and we're here with Keod Smith, an old compatriot of ours that we fought a good fight with back in the day. We have to explain to, I was just saying to Keod, we have to explain to people what Clifton was and what it meant. Because young people, kids that vote, this was 14 years ago. And you figure 18-year-olds today were 4.
Right.
Even 30-year-olds were like 16, and you're really not into it at 16. And it was such a huge monumental thing for so many reasons. The environmental movement here really started taking off when Sam Duncombe stood in Rawson Square with a lot of us and demonstrated against longline fishing and got results. And then there was a little tiff with the Montague foreshore that 4 of us actually stood there with placards and fought. It was to keep them from walling off the foreshore so that just in case you were driving that stretch of road and something happened, you might have a place to pull over instead of having to go over 18-inch curbs. And we basically won that battle. And then you came along with Goodman's Bay.
Yes.
And that was about 40 people out there standing with you or so.
Yes.
Yeah?
Or more.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
well, yeah, but it wasn't multitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And then came that night in Lyford Key.
Mm-hmm.
St. Peter's?
St. Paul.
St. Paul. Well, I knew it began with P. The hall there. And there had to have been, 500 people there?
Oh, I don't know. I know it was
standing room.
Oh, it
literally.
was packed. Literally. People were on the porches.
Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
In fact,
that's
I had
right.
to push my way through.
That's right.
Through the crowd just to see what was going on the inside.
It was announced that morning that there was a town meeting to discuss the development of the Clifton area as a gated community. And it was kind of interesting, I think, because the government at the time, now this is 1999, about February, I think.
Actually, it was 1998.
98?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez. February.
It was 1998.
Okay. I think the government was very shocked because it didn't get any big announcements. It just, that morning, and this is before Facebook, remember? People kind of knew.
Patty, maybe what I might suggest, if I might, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. Unfortunately for us all, there is cause for this show again. But that being as it may, I think we have to embrace it as an opportunity to deal with this thing now once and for all and to take it to its final conclusions.
Hopefully.
Now, I think in order to really put the story right, if I take a moment and explain that back then we did not really know, although we had snippets coming to us, what Clifton really was. The average person would know Clifton really to be Clifton Pier, meaning the place where BC is.
And you go fishing and all.
And then I don't even know if people used to call where they fish off the rocks Clifton. It just simply, all of that was regarded as Jaws Beach.
Yes.
Although Jaws Beach in and of itself was all the way around on the sort of almost eastern or northeastern side of the tip. But that being as it may, when the development or idea or news of this development of gated community came to the average person that I know of, the first thing that incensed everybody was this thought that the roadway was going to be cut off. And the roadway, if for those persons who drive down there now, you would know that as you come around past Lightfoot Key, there's a road that goes over toward where the new now Albany is.
Right.
And essentially that was going to be as far as you could go.
Yeah.
And there was this huge gated community that was designed to go there, to have a lot of finger canals with, similar to what you now have at Old Fort Bay, coming in for people to bring their boats right up to their homes, etc. And that incensed people because a lot of people use Jaws Beach as one of the beaches. Right. And a part of the big problems going on then was that people felt that there were lesser and lesser access to public beaches.
That's right.
And I think that was the first thing that really attracted people's attention. And then the government realized that at least there was some pushback. They decided to have a town meeting so they can determine, get a pulse from the people.
Mm-hmm.
And
what
they found
out there.
And they put it all the way back there.
Notice,
the supposed excuse was that, well, this is where it's going to be,
nearby.
And so therefore somewhere near here, and so therefore we'll have it here. The reason behind that is so that the average person who was incensed or who was showing that they were upset with the idea, for the most part, people out of Baintown were not going to just jump in a bus or gather together and use gasoline to go all the way there. But it backfired. But before we even get to that point, though, Patty, I think it's important for people to know that Clifton, we kind of talking about historically, but knowledge that came to the public domain in a fast-forward way. We only got to learn about this after the fight started. Mm-hmm. But it is a place where archaeologists, in particular, Laurie Wilkie and Paul Farnswick, Drs. Paul Farnswick and Laurie Wilkie, had discovered that there were 3 civilizations that occupied this particular bit of property, which was some 206 acres of land. And you're talking about pre-Columbian, the Lucayans. You're talking about the African slave trade that came through there and flourished through there, and occupied it. And then, of course, the loyalists who kept the slaves in this area. And there were artifacts, and still are artifacts, and ruins, and other kinds of things, which will include also burial sites because of the way we know anthropologically we lived in those times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in those set of circumstances, it actually attracted a lot of people's attention. Now, back in 1989, and this is really where the fight started without even anyone knowing it was a fight. Back in 1989, Sir Lyndon Pinling, who was then the Prime Minister of the country, made a determination, his government made a determination, that it was going to move the containerized port from downtown Nassau to Clifton. And so what he did is he went through the process and he acquired the property. There is law that if the government decide that they need to use your land for a public purpose, they can take the land from you and you're entitled to be paid for it. In recent times, a lot of people would have seen, for example, on Prince Charles Drive, where a lot of the road was widened. And a part of the reason why they were able to widen it is that the government took a strip of land from everyone along that strip and paid them whatever the value was for it. But Sir Lyndon made that acquisition. Now, the way the law functions is once the government acquires the property and vests it in the treasury of the Bahamas, that is it. You are never entitled to your land back, but you can push to get your money back. And so Sir Lyndon and his government at the time, after having done that, were themselves exposed to reports from environmental groups, as well as a group that they commissioned to do the investigation, and told them that this was not the right place to do it. Environmentally, it will be a disaster, and a number of other reasons why they just simply stopped. So nothing ever happened. And then in comes the F&M government, and very shortly after they came into office, not very shortly because this was in their second term, they made a determination that they're now going to allow this development to occur. And there was a lot of discussion about whether the land was government's land or whatever. And that was a big question that I had to ask myself as a new lawyer, a young lawyer at the time, was how is the government going to give public land to a private entity to do private enterprise to make trade loads of profit for that private enterprise? It just made absolutely no sense. It could not happen. In law, it couldn't happen. And I think that might have been the one thing, although I think there were some other spiritual reasons that sort of just drew me to go out there, because I had no intention on going to the town meeting. But in any event, that's the basic history in a nutshell in terms of the snippet points of what was all happening at that time.
There were a couple other points that you left out, and this could have been true back in 1989. That land also sat on a large aquifer. There was a large water supply underneath that land that, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, and I've never heard it mentioned, but obviously a port would have contaminated that like crazy. As we discussed Clifton and the proposed Clifton Key. There is no Clifton Key. That's what they were calling the housing development. But anyhow, the proposed Clifton Key golf course would have contaminated that water supply. Also, the reefs, which generate off Clifton, which generate now a tremendous amount of money for divers, for dive trips, they would have been compromised.
Yes, no, certainly. I think that would have been the primary reason, and that is that
in
the
89.
reef system, Golden Key is just off the way,
right?
And and then there is also a continental shelf or a shelf. There's a drop of about 1,000, 1,500 feet of water, just as you maybe less than 400 or 500 feet off of Clifton coast. I happen to have dove there. I scuba dived off of Golden Key before. Beautiful. Scary, because then when you see the abyss and it's black and it's like you are in the midst of nothingness, you know, you want to come back to land quickly. But the point I make though is that there were a number of reasons why Sir Lyndon and those made a determination not to proceed. But once they determined not to proceed, the question is, people wondered, and there was a lot of argument. They said, well, it was a lousy Pinling government. They didn't pay the true owners, and so therefore the true owners retain title. Not true. And then they say, well, there may be, some people will say, well, the Ingram government is just as lousy because it did not pay. The reality is, though, there was a quieting matter. There was a quieting action, a legal action in the Supreme Court of the Bahamas going on as to who was the owner prior to the acquisition. And so the government could not pay anybody. And that matter was only resolved, I think it would have been in 1993. No. It was maybe earlier.
There was a conversation about different people. Now I remember.
Yes,
because the original owner, the supposed owner, was the Oaks Estate.
It was a company called Nassau Limited, which was owned by Nancy Oaks at that time, because I think that she was still alive. Yeah, but it really was her father's company.
Yes.
So Harry Oaks.
Yes.
And I have some very interesting theories as it relates to Sir Harry Oaks and his demise and how it connects to Clifton. But we'll get to that at another time.
That sounds interesting.
The point is, though, this, Patty, the land itself, which is the 208 acres of land for those who are familiar, as you're driving from Lyford Key, going toward Clifton Pier, just as you pass the little road that goes to the beach, it's all of that land and all of the huts on the right-hand side. That's the piece of land we're talking about. Although the Clifton Estate, the plantation, goes to, I think, 300 or 400 acres of land on the other side of the road as well.
It was a total of 600 acres.
Yes.
But the 208 were the only ones.
Was the part that was in question.
And this, we haven't even touched on the fact that this is the only place on New Providence where slave huts and buildings of the plantation were so well preserved, or even existed.
You know, interestingly enough, and this was one of the things that I learned, and I only learned this after I started to dig a little deeper. There are ruins in what you know now as Lyford Key.
Really?
Yes. Lyford Key, as you know it today, was also owned by William Wiley. Yeah. And it was owned by William Wiley after the man named William Lyford, because he actually lost it because he went into debt and William Wiley bought the land from him. But there are slave ruins in there.
Which is a perfect example of why you don't want a gated community between you and your patrimony.
And what Lyford Key developer, Mr. H.G. Christie, and those did, because there was a different kind of power base and how things were done in those days. The public roadway is not the roadway that you know now. The roadway went through the gates of Lyford Key. That's a public road.
Yes.
And if you were to go to Google, you will see the road actually go and it bends toward the southwest.
Sir Clifford used to tell a story about that, how even then as a young politician, when they proposed to change the road and close off Lyford Key to vehicular traffic, which they subsequently did, he protested that.
Yes, but see, one of the things that actually was a part or base of my legal action in the Clifton fight to pause and to turn Mr. Ingram back at the time is that under the law of prescriptive rights, there's a question as to whether the government was entitled or could, in fact, if it did, in fact, because we don't know yet, I've not seen any documents, that if it could give the right of the roadway or the land under the roadway to these people for a private purpose. And so the argument that I have always maintained, even during the Clifton fight, when there would have been some persons who would suggest that I could not come into Lyford Key, and I would tell them this is a public road, and if they didn't lift the gate, I would drive through the gate because it is a public roadway. They simply put a gate across it, have some documents which are not worth anything. It's not worth even the paper that it's on, because the public road does not go up that hill toward Mount Pleasant. The public roadway goes more exactly. And so, in the circumstances, Patty, though, so as not to get sidetracked, Clifton was really this thing that caused so many people to be excited. Now, yes, there were environmental issues, but that was not the reason I got involved.
No, everybody had something
that
attracted them. That was what was so amazing about this.
I only learned about environmental things to do with Clifton after I got in the fight, and I must credit that knowledge, the passion I now have for the environment, I will credit it solely to Sam Duncombe, because she made me understand. She made me think about something that I had never had in my consciousness before. But I'm an Africanist at heart. And so when I went out there just to stand and just to watch and listen, that's all I went there for, no other reason. And standing up and walking to the front of the stage area to the microphone was Vivian Wiley, who I grew up with, my childhood friend. And Vivian was going through some challenges in those days. And Vivian's first comments that he made, he said, "I am a recovering drug addict." And then he proceeded to speak about what he had to say. I realized the genius of that, because what he did was he shut up everybody who knew that he had a problem. They could not speak about it because he dealt with it.
Yep.
And he now says, now listen to what I have to say. And my friend spoke about the fact that he was a Wiley who can trace his ancestry back to that plot of land.
Back to one of those cabins.
Exactly. And that it would be improper for there to be any development where his ancestors lived, worked, died, and more importantly, were buried. When he said that, that sent chills as it is currently doing through my body. And I said, you know something, I cannot allow my friend to stand on his own. That was going through my mind at the moment. But that's not the thing that took me over the top. What really took me over the top was Mr. Oscar Johnson, who was in the audience. I had heard about him, but I had never met him before.
Awesome.
But he stood forward with a thundering kind of a voice, and he said, if you all do this development, my grandchildren will take it back. And that's a man after my heart. Yeah. It's like, hey, we really had revolutionaries in this country.
Boy.
And I made up my mind right there and then, Patty, that I didn't understand fully what was going on. All of what I've spoken about so far on your show, I didn't understand any of that. All I knew was there was this spiritual thing. There was this feeling. And I was committed to this fight. But the thing that put the nail in the coffin, even beyond all of that, was when Mr. Tommy Turnquest, he was the Minister of Works, I think, at the time,
And one of the speakers that evening.
Yes, I think he was conducting. He was the host of the meeting. He then handed the microphone over to Mr. Chaffin, I think it was. And Mr. Chaffin then began to say his thing and say how all of the concerns that were being made, they're going to be addressed. But the manner in which he was saying it, gave me this very distinct impression that this was a fait accompli.
It was a done deal.
And that's when I then jumped into the fray, because I was kind of a little perplexed as to how this foreign fellow could stand up in the front of this room and tell me as a Bahamian what my minister could not tell me in that meeting. And he was telling us what would be done and how it would be done, and essentially suggesting that however he is saying it, that's the way it was going to be resolved. And I stood up and I went straight up to the front. I remember that. And I said and I asked, it's like, is this a fait accompli? How is it that this man who is foreign to my country could, this may be paraphrasing, but can actually tell us what's going to happen and you can't? That's when I realized whatever kind of political awareness that I would have had and that eventually developed into might have happened right then. Yeah. Because as far as I was concerned, it was totally improper for him to have said that. Would not have had a problem if he said, listen, this is what we will propose to the government to deal with your concerns. But he was speaking in the definitive that this is what will be done and this is what will be accepted. And from that moment, I grabbed a hold of Vivian just as we walked out of that town meeting. And we went on from there. And the fight built and it grew. My only interest was just simply bringing to bear whatever legal knowledge I had or could develop or had access to. And then, of course, me being Africanist at heart. As it developed, the parts started to move together. Then I started and I got to meet Sam. And she started to talk about those things. And I said, well, Sam, you continue to do that part. That's you. I will learn. And I can't speak on it because I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Vivian, he's talking about ancestral things and things that only he could speak on. Dr. C.B. Morse was involved as well. C.B. Morse was one, still is, an inner city preacher who knew, who has his hand on the pulse of how inner city people thought and think. These people and many others, there are many others. Dr. Thaddeus MacDonald is an educationalist and right. College of Bahamas lecturer.
Michael Stevenson.
Michael Stevenson. These were people who, listen, we are academia and we bring in to bear to this thing. We could not tap in, at least not directly, into the lore of Dr. Laura Wilkie, the archaeologist, or Dr. Paul Farnsworth. But the point is that they had the information.
And she came.
And we had to fight and eventually cause and compel Mr. Ingram to release the document, which was totally inconsistent with what the Chaffin group was saying. But that movement, Patty, that was that spontaneous combustion of peoples that just came together and started something.
Yeah.
And this now brings us to today. This is why I am so incensed at the fact that you can have a person like Mr. Louis Bacon who would actually tell a lie as he has to say that he led this fight. He's taking from the Bahamian people something that belonged to them.
What we're referring to is a press release, I guess you could call it, that was put out on the occasion of Mr. Bacon being given an award by the Audubon Society in New York. And the press release was published I read it in the Punch. I presume it was in the other papers.
Yes.
That did indeed give during this fight, let me backtrack. During the fight for Clifton, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came down here twice. Once he spoke in St. Paul's over the hill, and once at Lightfoot Key.
Yes.
And I was at both of those, and he was a very, very impassioned speaker. He called Clifton the Auschwitz of the diaspora. It was an extremely moving speech both times, and it attracted, he attracted international media. Keod was already attracting international media in his own efforts, and I'll let him explain that. But there were articles in the New York Times about this. There were articles in almost every major newspaper, especially in San Francisco, because both Lori Wilkie, who teaches at Berkeley and taught then at Berkeley as well, and the Bechtel Group, which was the funder, the money behind this,
California.
They were both San Francisco-based entities. And Mr. Bacon I didn't know who was. I knew Mr. Kennedy was staying with a friend in Lyford Key, a schoolmate, I believe he was. I was told at the time, but I never heard a name. And now we are being led to believe by these press releases that that person that facilitated Mr. Kennedy's participation was Mr. Bacon. But I will tell you, as somebody who was relatively involved in this, I never heard Mr. Bacon's name ever.
I mean,
in this fight, and I was involved with all of y'all. I
will let me give him a little bit of benefit for the doubt. I know that some of the people who were involved with the fight told me about some people in Lyford Key.
Yes.
Who was putting monies in, or who was helping with some funds, and. You know,
for their reasons too. They had their own set of reasons.
I don't even want to get into that.
Yeah,
but my point is this, though, the name that stuck in my head, but just because I just didn't know Lyford Keers like that, one or two persons I did know of, was the name actually Joe Louis.
Yes.
Because I guess they were telling me Louis Bacon, but that's the name. Maybe it was because Mr. Joe Louis was doing some well-known developments.
Well, Joe Louis was very involved with New Providence Development and with Albany now, and
the point that I make, though, Patty, and this is the most important maybe for these discussions, is that the start had nothing to do with any of the individuals in Lyford Key. I told you how I got excited about this. And while the Bahamian people would remember that Robert Kennedy was even put on the stop list, and he went through a lot of struggles. He was there. He came in. Of course, he's an international celebrity. Yeah. And so for an international celebrity to come, fine. I mean, I did not attend any of the places where he presented. But for me, my reason was not because I didn't have the chance to. My reason was really conscious, and that was because here it is. I knew that there was this grassroots movement, and I was concerned then that what we now see happen 14 years later was about to occur. And I wanted my Bahamian people to be proud of themselves, that they did something on their own. The only other kind of movement, grassroots movement, that was able to turn the government back, perhaps you go to 67, and then before that to the 1940s when you had the Burma Road riot. Even the women's suffrage, I made a mistake on another show the other day. Women's suffrage was not a grassroots movement. It happened to be some people who were in the know, whose husbands or whose spouses or friends were in the know, and they knew how to lobby. But grassroots movement, meaning you have the average person making the change happen. This is the third that I know of in recent Bahamian history, meaning, say, from the turn of the century coming into the 20th century. And so here it is now. We have this thing that existed. And as it began to develop, and as it took root, and there was coverage in the New York Times and the Miami Herald, and we didn't have the internet was a thing, but it didn't exist as it is today.
Well, it existed to the point that that's where we read the New York Times and when it came out that morning and things like that. But it didn't. Facebook didn't exist.
No.
So the passing of the knowledge was
not there.
It was radio talk shows and so most.
So I say all of that to say this, though, Patty, is that it started then, and it built and it grew, and the average person participated. And they showed up, and they turned up at the town meetings, and they made it very clear. They wrote letters to the editor. They went to every meeting that was organized, no matter who organized it, just to make sure that it was known that it was not
big
so.
Meetings, too.
And then there were some of us who were a little more dedicated than others who would stand up in Rossin Square. I remember Vivian and I always talk about an occasion where we actually stood in Rossin Square with our placards. It was just he and I. And we were standing there, and we were shouting to the people passing the streets and into the thing and making sure they saw our little cards that we made up with our own handwriting. And then eventually others came. Yep. And then when we came back the next time, more people were there. This thing happened. And all kinds of games were going on. And so here it is that we were able to push back, and we were able to put the government on stop. And we were able to checkmate Mr. Hubert Ingram. And you have to understand how strong Mr. Ingram was in those days. Very strong, very capable and a very persistent kind of politician
This
who,
was the second
no matter if you
mid of
like
the
him or not on a personal level, you had to respect him for being as effective as he was then.
This was his mid-second term.
Yes, and so, but we were fearless. It made no difference. And I knew in my heart that Ingram understood that this was greater than him. And if you think back, his participation was very small on the public level. Okay?
Ooh, he
I don't
had
think
a lot to say in the House about certain
No,
members of the fight.
But see, in the House, that's where you're protected.
Yeah.
But he wasn't coming out there to say anything about anything else. And so what we had is this thing that developed. And what it all comes down to is, or recently, when the Audubon Society decided to give Mr. Bacon this accolade, which we don't take issue with. Mr. Bacon is known to be a contributor worldwide, especially in the United States, of huge amounts of money for environmental conservation. The thing that bothered me was, one, he told a lie. He said something that I know he knows is not true. Not even half truth. He's nowhere in the leadership. Just because you have a lot of money don't mean you lead a thing. Especially when you're talking about, these are things where you're talking about, this is this is public advocacy. This is civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. We were threatened to be locked up. Mm-hmm. And you, just because you may be able to give monies to buy T-shirts or pay for placards, that makes you a leader? Yes, you are incensed as well. You are a part of it as well.
Fine.
And we welcome you.
Absolutely.
But you can't take from us as a people what is ours for us to always have as ours. Yeah. No one in the Bahamas can ever go in the United States and say that we led the Civil War.
Exactly. Exactly.
I can find back in my ancestry people who fought and died.
Exactly.
But that didn't mean that the Bahamian people led that.
Exactly.
That was led by them.
Exactly.
And so in these kind of circumstances, when you have a person such as Mr. Bacon who would say that, and then worse, you would have no less than our own Prime Minister, Mr. Christie in this case, who would lend credence to that lie.
And we have to explain why Mr. Christie's involvement in this, in Clifton, was so important, both to him and, I believe, to the Progressive Liberal Party's victory in 2002, is when Mr. Christie and other members of the Progressive Liberal Party went out and stood on that beach at Clifton and said, "Be warned. We put you on notice. When we come next to be the government, anything you have been granted Chafin Light, anything you have been granted as developers, we will rescind. Mm-hmm. Just be warned."
I will say this, Patty, to put things in real context, seeing that we have this opportunity. This fight is not about me, but I can only speak definitively about how I involved myself. Mr. Christie made that presentation in March of 2000. Mm-hmm. I started to be involved in this fight in 1998.
That's right.
Fighting almost this exclusively, nothing else I was doing. The fight was well on its way. Mm-hmm. And another thing, just as a little snippet to throw in the little ring, I was also a sitting vice chairman of the PLP. So I was on the inner circle. And so maybe people may want to ask themselves, or might ask the question, it took Keod 2 years to convince his party to come on Clifton Bay? I would just leave it as a rhetorical question.
Well, with all due respect to our beloved Prime Minister, one of our 3 beloved Prime Ministers that we have had in this country in the past half a century or more, he's never been accused of making lightning quick judgments like that. So, this was, as well as I do, and what was going on in those days. Everybody expected us to run out of steam, sit down, be quiet, and just let it happen. And everybody, that.
And I want you to underscore the word
after 2 years. Everybody.
Now, the point...
After 2 years, they figured we were serious.
See, it was going on that long, and by this time... This is around the time when also Mr. Kennedy got involved. Yeah. By this time, you had the average person in the backyards of Baintown, at the domino table, in the bar room, talking about this fight.
Everybody.
Because of the energies that we put in it. because of the lead that we had.
And we didn't stop. We didn't go away.
Ever stop. See, hence you had this whole concept of this coalition to save, because there was no one person.
No.
And if any one person said that I was the leader, they're talking nonsense.
But you see, you said something earlier. People came in for different reasons. There were leaders of areas, like the college really had a lot of these meetings there, if you recall.
Yes.
And under Thaddeus MacDonald and Jessica Minnis and Michael Stevenson. So they kind of led the intellectual academic discussion of what the land meant. Then you had the environmentalists who kind of led that stream. Then you had the legal people who were talking about the actual legality of what was going on. Then don't forget, you had Dr. Beach, remember, who came and said, oh yeah, they're going to give you this piece of land as public beach, but the way they're going to block off the water, in 5-10 years, that's just going to be rocks because the sand flow will change. And then you had all these people in different areas leading different cohorts that was the beauty of Clifton. They all came together with one thing in mind.
Yeah, see,
that should not be a gated community.
So, Patty, you see, this whole attempt now that you see that is being made by Mr. Bacon and supported by Mr. Christie to revise our history is part of the reason why we must now take this story, the true story, to the world. And the world need to understand, of course, us locally need to understand. We need to write this, we need to put it down. And so what must now be done in terms of direction is we must find the most effective way to immediately take the steps to implement the ways of safeguarding the authentic history of Clifton, not just the story of the struggle to save it, but also of Clifton itself.
Amen. When we come back, I want to tell you why Clifton was important to me. We'll be right back. And we're back on Parliament Street. We're here with Keod Smith, and we're talking about Clifton. And I said I would tell you why Clifton was important to me. Clifton was, I once heard a brilliant presentation, you probably heard it too, that Paul Adderley did on the history of Clifton, of the owners. The one owner that I knew going into this was William Wiley. And William Wiley was a very interesting character in that he was not what everybody wanted him to be. He was the Attorney General at one time of the Bahamas, and as Attorney General, he made some unpopular decisions. For example, he refused to give an alleged slave back to its master in the United States, I believe, and he didn't think along the ways of the times. One thing he did that was amazing was they were going to arrest him for disagreeing with him, and they sent the provost marshal out to Clifton. Now that's 14 miles from downtown Nassau. They sent him out on his horse, and when he reached Clifton to serve the writ of arrest, he was met by William Wiley's slaves, and they were armed. Now I want you to think about what I just said. In those days, this is 1816, you did not arm your slaves. It was not what owners did. Because, quite not naturally, a lot of people were afraid the slaves would turn it back on their owners, and rightly so. But in any case, William Wiley armed his slaves to protect him. The provost marshal was shocked to see these gun-toting enslaved individuals at the gate, telling him, no, Mr. Wiley wasn't there. And when he was so late he had to spend the night in the bush out there. He couldn't get back to town. And when he woke up in the morning, his horse was gone. Amazing. So he had to walk back to town. But William Wiley was an interesting individual in that he taught his slaves to read. In fact, he rewarded his driver for every slave that was taught to read. He gave his driver a monetary bonus.
Driving, I remember we talking...
Slave driver.
Slave driver.
That's what we're calling
the people, there would be the black people who were actually whipping the black people to do work.
Yeah.
So
but
driver does not mean
driver does not
car.
mean carriage, no. He also paid them to build the walls in Clifton. I forget what it was. It's in one of Gail Saunders' books. It was much per foot.
It would be my view about Mr. Wiley, that Mr. Wiley was a jurist who understood fundamental rights and freedoms, maybe by virtue of his profession, but it was inculcated into him. And I think he was also, as a businessman, he would have understood that it made sense to allow the people who he had enslaved, essentially, to earn monies from their own vegetable farming. Because then if they did their vegetable farming, he didn't have to worry about feeding them.
Exactly.
And a number of other things. But all of these things are things which we have a lot of information about all over the world, literally.
But none here in New Providence, and you can't
get all of it here.
You can't go anywhere else, or very few places here that I know of, where you can touch these walls and know that they were built.
But
200 years ago.
I remember, Patty, back in the 70s, going to Crooked Island to visit with my grandparents. And you see all of these buildings with walls that were about 2 feet thick, with, and these were stone houses. And I remember as a child, then 8 or 9 years old, saying, gee, I actually remember saying this to my mom. She was not on that particular trip with us, but saying to my mother when I came back, I said, Mommy, how is it that we were living in a wooden house? Because, living in a wooden house in New Providence in those days was kind of looked down on.
Yeah.
I said, we're living in a wooden house, and y'all in Crooked Island had stone house. And she smiled. Just really didn't have anything to say about it. But what I realized when I was in Crooked Island, that I saw at Clifton, is that behind every one of those huts, and if you go to today, you'll probably still see it, there was a tamarind tree. And I learned from my mother and my grandparents and uncles and aunts that the reason why you had the tamarind tree, tamarind branches and the tamarind branches was the best kind of wood to use to do lime kiln, And for those persons who are my age and younger than me, because even my age, a lot of people don't know about it. Although I do understand they try to teach people about it now. You put that together with conch shell and some other things, and you make the lime by which you make those walls, along with rocks that you just simply go and pick up.
You didn't go to the hardware store and buy it.
No. And so, but it was a bonding agent that obviously we can see it stands the test of time. And that's how we built our buildings from way back then. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of buildings that slaves would have lived in, that was not easily destroyed by hurricanes. That if you were to go right across the river to the United States, slaves lived in wooden quarters that was not even properly designed for the kind of environment they lived in, with the cold and so on in the Carolinas, etc. Right. So when we look at all of these things, Clifton had and has a lot of archaeological and anthropological answers for us to understand who we are as a people.
Oh, definitely.
And then, of course, when you look at the environmental things, there's so many interesting and peculiar environmental things about the land and, more importantly, the seabed just in the Clifton Bay. Because a part of this whole thing that brings me to have this discussion today is because there's a move afoot to give the seabed of the Clifton Bay, which is what I talked about earlier where I dove, to give the seabed of the Clifton Bay to an entity, albeit a government agency, but for the purposes of certain other people being able to assert rights across that. And what I fought for, and what you fought for, Patty, came to fruition in 2004 when we had the formation of the Clifton National Heritage Act. That act, that legislation that was passed in 2004, came about so that not only to own the 208 or 206 acres of land, but to eventually also get granted to it the seabed of the water just on the outside, because the seabed may also have certain artifacts that may still be embedded there.
That's true.
Okay? Because keep in mind, the Lucayan people, they lived in the sea as well.
No, they wouldn't have been there if the sea wasn't there.
Wasn't beneficial to them because remember, for those who don't know, of course, a lot of Bahamians know you go on the rock, especially around mutton and snapper season, you catch fish for days. Although, unfortunately, I can't catch a fish any bigger than 6 inches. I don't understand that one. But that being as it may, you can catch fish. But when you dive under there, you have a huge a huge reef system. And so you have naturally a reservoir of life that can give and maintain and sustain life. And that's why this area was so crucial. If you dive on the southwestern part of Clifton, just as you go around by the Clifton Pier, where the brewery and those are, you have the occasion of seeing tiger sharks, which are very rare, is like regular. And these kinds of things are things, Patty, that they were trying to keep from the Bahamian people. We had this opportunity, and they are now trying to say the story only happened, this thing only happened because of these two fellas. They came riding in from on high, and they came with their big bucks, and they brought the answers, and they said, Bahamian people, wake up and do absolute nonsense, total lies and untruths, and those things cannot be allowed to stand. It cannot be allowed to stand. And unfortunately, let's face it, our people sometimes fall asleep too easily. And before you know it, Patty, as is being now moved on, bit by bit, chunk by chunk, grain of sand by grain of sand, Clifton will be pillaged off to special interests who are lurking in the shadows of environmental protection. And see, I happen to be now, I can say I'm an environmentalist. And I can tell you, I know about those shadows quite a lot because of the position that I was privileged enough to serve in. Interestingly enough, the position I'm talking about is being the ambassador for the environment and the chairman of the BEST Commission, which is Bahamas Environment, Science and Technology Commission, during the time when I served in Parliament. Interestingly enough, my whole parliamentary career, Patty, was based almost exclusively on Clifton. I chose my seat that I ran in. I was not sent to Mount Moriah. I chose Mount Moriah because Tommy Toinquist, who I had the problem with in this Clifton meeting, was running in there. And he was the leader of the F&M at the time. So I said, listen, this group of people that were just reprehensible to me, I'm going to take the head off of this monster. And I did what I had to do as an activist. That was not fully understood and appreciated by people on my side, to take that head off at that time, to make sure the people understood that this fight was going to go far beyond. And then, when I defeated the leader, I did not get into the haughty-taughty attitude, I defeated the leader, put me into the cabinet and all that nonsense. Mr. Christie would tell you that I told him directly, I'm not interested in going into the cabinet. But he couldn't really tell you my real reason why. I told him that I'll tell you what I have an interest in afterwards. So after he appointed his whole cabinet, then he and I sat. I said, Mr. Prime Minister, my interest is being the ambassador for the environment and chairman of the BEST Commission. And he gave it thought, and he said, yes, okay, I will advise the minister, etc. And it happened. Now, he still probably would not, he might have. I'm not going to take anything from him. But my reason for it, one, I was on the backbench, arms linked from the cabinet, because I needed to make sure this cabinet fellas, because of how the system worked, that they made sure this act come to being. Yeah. And as the chairman of the BEST Commission, this is the environmental route, the kind of power that seemed to be existing, although neither Dr. Earl DeVoe nor Senator at the time, Lynn Hollowesco, was exercising the kind of right of power, if you would, that they should when it comes to environmental protection and so on. So there was my choice to be there. I wasn't just simply thrown in there. I asked, and luckily and fortunately, the Prime Minister agreed. And I was in Parliament for the most part to ensure that this legislation came to fruition. And it would have been a backbencher's bill, but the way the system functioned, it had to be presented. And I made an error the other day when I was speaking in terms of seconding the bill. I did not second the bill in the strictest sense of parliamentary language. Of course, I spoke to the bill. All right. But in speaking to the bill, I wanted to make sure that the intention behind the bill was primarily that not one single inch of this land was ever going to be sold. It was going to be held by the Bahamian people through this legislation forever and ever and ever. And there are some people who were involved with the fight in terms like people like the Bacons, I'm sure. I mean, I never met him, never knew he existed, who I am certain would probably say they disliked me because I brought in my Africanness. That's the only thing I could bring to the table. That's all I could bring to the table.
Yeah.
And fine. Now I learned later that one foundation out of the United States that was actually speaking with me about the possibility of sending the monies down to the Bahamas to pay for the land so it can go into some sort of trust to be held for the people was an entity called the Moore Capital Foundation, which I didn't know.
That was his.
But it is Mr. Louis Bacon's thing. But we didn't receive the money. In fact, it came to a certain point in time, I guess they realized, hold on now, we're not going to put any monies in the control of these people. Under the trust that was created, the settlor was Vivian Wiley. I was the trust protector to make sure that we can do this thing because I knew that the government could not give it back to Nancy Oakes or whomever said that they owned it. So if it is that the government was saying they were hard-pressed, didn't have the money, which is what they were saying, to pay for the land, our job was to go find the money, get it to pay for the land, and then put it into people's hands. And so these are the kinds of things that was happening. Now, Mr. Bacon would have made an offer, I guess, through his Moore Capital to say he's going to do it, but he never went through with it. Because a part of what was conveyed to me were things where would have really brought about a very serious problem for the people here. And that is that part of the land, the more people who would talk to me on the phone eventually talked in terms of part of this land being used for the purposes of helping to maintain the Clifton Park that we were going to create. And the difficulty I had with that was that if we sell the land, any part of it, it's obviously going to be sold for a profit, or at least at higher rates, which would be inconsistent with what charitable purposes are for. And then if we sold the land, is all the money is going to be going to the entity we create? And I was not given a definitive position from what I recall. And it just made me concerned as an attorney and someone who was in business for many years before becoming an attorney, that this could have come close to, if not be within the realm of defrauding the IRS. Because charitable organizations that are 501c3 qualified are entitled to get tax exemption from monies they give to charities. And here it is, people are telling me and talking to me and sending me communication, written communication about some of the land being used for this purpose. Say, hey, look, once you put your money and you get your tax exemption, you're not supposed to be able to get any of that money back. So if your money goes overseas to the Bahamas and you're saying to your U.S. government that you should get tax exemption from the contribution you made, and then in the Bahamas you receive some of that money back by sales, then the money, effectively, I would have been involved with not only defrauding but also money laundering. So all of these kinds of things were going through my mind. And so my job, Patty, was to make sure legally none of the people who would have been unwittingly brought into nonsense was brought into nonsense. And so that's just my little part. And if you were to sit down with Sam Duncombe, she can tell you about a lot of other things that I still today don't even know that she was involved with. Or Dr. C.B. Morse. And how he probably would have been pulled down through Rupert Dean Lane and made to sit down in front of a number of people who lived through there and explain what was going on. And for him to have to call on the people necessary to bring them out to Clifton. These are the kinds of things. Or Vivian being able to tell you how he would have been threatened many times. So was I. But in the end, it didn't matter. You do what you could do. We do what we can do. And so all of these kinds of things, Patty, are things which gives us all the more reason why the true story has to be told. And we have to make sure that revisionists such as Mr. Bacon, such as Mr. Christie, to the degree that he has made himself or given Mr. Bacon the belief that he should be strong enough and bold enough to say such a ridiculous thing, to say such a thing that he must have known would incense somebody down here.
Now, just so people are clear, the Clifton Heritage Park of this 206 acres is administered by the Clifton Heritage Foundation.
Well, it's not a foundation, but yes. But
Clifton Heritage Authority, yes. Why wasn't the seabed made a part of that at the time?
I know I lobbied for it. And the draft of the legislation which I had prepared as a member of parliament in those days included the sea area. But the immediate issue, which I yielded to in the backroom arguments, was that in the first instance, you had this 208 or 206 acres of land that used to belong to someone. And in order for us to secure it, it had to be paid for. Mm-hmm. And if we made legislation that was designed squarely around just resolving that issue, then at least the legislation is made, and then we can go on from there. People like Margot Blackwell, for example, very committed environmentalist, was the one certainly that put in my head the thought of COB having a campus of sorts on the Clifton property so that the sea life and sea creatures and the rest of that kind of things that goes on in the water could be properly studied. You know, I've learned so much in recent years for different purposes about how the currents move in and around the Clifton Bay area. And, of course, having dove there before, you understand the life that exists in the waters. And so all of these kinds of things and that was going on all at once, for someone to come out and to say, as they have, that they led this fight, it's really problematic, and it is an insult to the Bahamian people.
There were many leaders. There were many leaders, and there were, and it was funny. In this country, you have people that follow political leaders, that follow church leaders, and that's fine. But in Clifton, in the fight for Clifton, you never felt like anybody was a follower. You always felt like we were all in this together.
No, like I said, it all just came together. Patty, again, because of my focus on African type stuff, I remember after a while, and some of the people who I had discussions with at this Moore Foundation or charity, they had understood that I was pushing a lot of the African thing, and they essentially said, "Well, Mr. Smith, you're going down the wrong pathway. That's not how we can help you," and all these other different kinds of things. And I mean, maybe they were being genuinely interested if I were to give the benefit of the doubt to say that that might have been a cause or a purpose that was outside the ambit of what their charity could do. I don't know. But I can tell, I said, listen, I'm not being racist. I'm simply being realistic. The reality is, I believe that a lot of the people I know who I want to and who I would want to encourage to be involved with this fight will not go there for the environment. No. But if you talk about, in truth, that there is some heritage that is connected to them, just like how I know a lot of white Bahamians who are loyalists, they go way back. They were there.
Yeah.
They might have been there for the loyalist heritage they have. They might have been there for different reasons. But I know of a lot of black people who would have come out because of this. And they said, well, if that's the case, we're not going to support your group. I said, well, whatever kind of money support I could have possibly have gotten from you all, that I can't think of what I did get because I got nothing from you all, is that, hey, look, it's fine. I said, the African heritage part of this fight will not die. I said, we will get stronger. And I remember being at Mr. Al Colley's house, right in the thick of this. And Mr. Al Colley had in his, as a house guest, this man named Jerry Lopes. And Jerry Lopes is now the CEO of the American Urban Radio Network. And that has about 400 radio stations within his network. And as I spoke with Mr. Lopes and Al, and everybody was weighing in on all of what was going on, I remember Mr. Lopes saying, hey, I know the perfect person who could help you with this fight, because I had told him that one of the things that we needed to do is we needed to make, and just using my words that I used to him, I said, listen, we need to make sure that this fight is a black fight. And we need to be able to show the connections between the Bahamas and the African American society, and the fact that this was the gateway in the Bahamas to slavery that they know there. And then in doing so, we want to lobby the Black Congressional Caucus. We want to lobby as many well-known people in the United States so we can take the fight to the doorstep of Bechtel. So we can be in touch with people like Maxine Waters and so on. And he said, listen, the one person that he knew, and of course he was talking within the realm of the world he was in, was this woman named Bev Smith.
She was one.
And she used to be on BET, and she still is a talk show host across the United States. And between Mr. Lopes and Mr. Al Colley being the Bahamian Al Colley I'm talking about, they caused Bev Smith to come down. First on her own. And she came down and she did this fact-finding type thing. And we took her to Clifton. She met with some of the people. She talked with us. She understood. She looked at some of the documents.
You had a meeting at the British Colonial with her.
Yes, but that was after.
That was okay.
So she was brought down, and then she said, "This is phenomenal." We were not paying Bev any money to come here. The only thing that we were committed to, obviously, is to making sure that she didn't have to pay anything to come here.
Yeah.
All right, and Mr. Al Colley and Mr. Jerry Lopes, they were responsible for the group of African Americans, including Prince Emmanuel Ben Yehuda from the Hebrew Israelites, the Black Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, to come down. That they were responsible for bringing in Jesse Jackson's representatives to this from the Rainbow Push Coalition, from bringing a number of other people down. But you never, to this day, ever heard Al Colley stand up and say he led the Clifton fight just because he had monies to put into this. But what he did, in my view, and what Mr. Lopes did, in my view, was a very significant part of this. What some of the preachers, like Bishop Neil Ellis, for example, what people like them did from their pulpit into their congregation and through their radio programs that was going on. And I'm pretty sure people like Bishop Ellis, who was on the international circuit at the time, and I'm fairly certain that people like Dr. Miles Monroe and his international circuit spoke about Clifton. And they would have been speaking, if nothing else, about the indomitable spirit that the Bahamian people truly have. And that how we are really, when the time counts, that we come together and we do things. And I'm certain that they would have made those connections to biblical history and the fact that our people survived, notwithstanding the subjugation. And I think that's one of the common themes that comes out of the Bible in almost any situation. And so when you look at all of those things, Patty, coming together, how could I and people like me stand by and allow people now to try and take away this consciousness that was aware that was brought to the fore in people's minds? This igniting of this fire again will never lead to it going out. So even if Mr. Bacon and Mr. Christie would have come and apologized profusely, I will not stop, and those who I've been speaking with over the last few weeks will not stop. We are in this now to take it to the next level, to make sure that this nonsense will never happen again. Never happen again. And so, unfortunately, for those who are a part of trying to revise history, they are now not even able to revise their role that they are playing in this part of the history of Clifton. They have done it, the fire is ignited, and it will never go out. It will be perpetual, because we have to now make this thing right. And having said all of what I said, let me just go back, because the Audubon Society, like I said, they would have made a decision to recognize Mr. Bacon, and that's fine. I'm sure that he deserves it in some form, and by whatever mechanism they use, he would fall within the ambit of their protocols, and he was decided. But I want to make it very clear, because he, Mr. Louis Bacon, invoked Clifton's name when he had his acceptance speech. He invited me and all of us here to weigh in on what he says, and to stand as firmly as I stand now and say he was telling an untruth. It was not true. It was a lie. And it ought not to have happened, because there was no need for him to speak about Clifton in the context of whatever it was, the award was that he was getting.
It was, yeah. He was certainly, as you say, he certainly did enough other things
Yeah. I mean, I know, I heard of people, and in fact, Mr. Bacon even said during his presentation that he said, oh, really, it was Mr. Kennedy who led the fight. But I never heard, but hear me out, I never heard, and although I know Mr. Kennedy was here speaking at College Bahamas recently, but I never heard Mr. Kennedy stand up and say, I know that there was a piece written by, in the letters to the editor by some Bennett person recently, who spoke in terms of, who was speaking about that presentation. Although I have issues that, of course he has celebrity, but, we have people more eminently qualified than Mr. Kennedy to speak about climate change. But that being as it may, the fact though is that this Mr. Bennett wrote about how Kennedy assisted the Clifton fight. No one, including me, can say that didn't happen.
Right.
And even if they said that Mr. Bacon had assisted,
absolutely,
I would not know, but I would not have any issue.
Exactly.
But for you to say that you were in the front and you caused this to happen, in other words, there were some words that Mr. Bacon used that really troubled me. In the beginning of the snippet or the part where he talked about the Clifton, and this is on YouTube, so I'm not guessing this. He says, here it is, my words, but I'm going to essentially try to summarize what he said. He said, here it is, me and Robert, two white men coming down to the Bahamas. Blah, 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 blah. In other words, they accepted us white men. Listen, we have white Bahamians. Patty, I don't know if you became a Bahamian citizen yet, but by virtue of the fact that you are married to a Bahamian, you are a Bahamian citizen.
I am a citizen.
And you are a pure Anglo-Saxon woman. You are not, there's no hint or tinge of black in you at all. But you have more passion and you have, in some instances, more knowledge than many Bahamians about this history. People like Mr. Bacon need to understand that our country is not the same as the United States. Not the same. And we've had the same ugly kind of history in past. But you talked about William Wiley. William Wiley he had, like I said, he had an understanding of fundamental rights and freedoms. Yes, this is the times. Yeah, you all work for me, but you can make some money too. When the weekend comes, take your goods to the market, Marcella. You keep the money.
That's where the ocean was important to those people too, because they went via ocean to the market.
So when you talk about all of these kinds of things, and you have Mr. Bacon saying what he said when it was not necessary to say, so then this is where I say, this is where you have now ulterior motives start to sink into my kind of conspiratorial mind. And that is when I start hearing that the Bahamas National Trust is essentially lobbying and would have received some monies from a quote-unquote unknown source. All right? This is what I'm hearing. And that this unknown source is giving the money because they want to see the seabed of Clifton put into the statutory entity of the Bahamas National Trust. And the first question that I have, and I will challenge my PLB government to remember that about 2 years ago, that the Bahamas National Trust fought tooth and nail and allowed the Aga Khan to destroy the Exuma Land and Sea Park, where you have the oldest form of sea creatures and sea life still in existence today. I can't say the long name, but the Latin name. But you're talking about a piece. I don't know if you've ever been to Exuma Keys, and I was there, Patty. And this boat was going at least about maybe 20 knots, which is kind of fast. 20 knots. And I'm looking over this edge of the boat, and I can see straight to the bottom, as if I was standing still. And I remember asking the boat captain, hey, how deep is the water here? And he said, it's about 25, 30 feet. That's just how pristine and clean this area was. And the Bahamas National Trust fought to allow this man to build a huge boat basin. This is a no-bill zone, No bill, no take, no nothing. Bahamians are arrested every day when they go and fish in this area. The Bahamas National Trust got additional powers right before the FNM lost the last election. And now, my government, and I say my government meaning my government, the government in existence today, but also the government that happens to be manned by my political party, are going to entertain the thought of putting Clifton Bay, the seabed of Clifton, into the hands of the Bahamas National Trust, when the entity which we created by legislation, that is the Clifton National Heritage Authority, has the right and power to actually hold the seabed in it.
Oh, they do?
Yes, it can sell and acquire land and properties. It's a charity. The government can simply grant the whole of the Clifton Sea Bay, including the area going around Golden Key, and including Golden Key,
to Clifton.
To Clifton National Heritage Authority. That was the intent behind it. Ask any of those who were there, who were really in the fight, and who had altruistic reasons and purposes for being there. That's the kind of thing, Patty. We cannot. This fire's reignited, and I will call on all of my colleagues who are in Parliament on both sides of the aisle, because I know of one or two of them who are on the opposite side of me politically, who are there now, who was a part of that fight then. Mm-hmm. And they are as passionate today as they were then.
Ooh. No, this is something that I don't care how many years have passed. This is something, it's very, very different than anything else we've ever experienced. And I remember going to a meeting when Jacinta Higgs took over as head of the Clifton Heritage Authority, and she had a meeting for a number of people who had been in the fight. And it was as if the years hadn't existed. We were just as passionate, and we were just as angry to see that parking lot covered over. But that's a whole other story. We need to take a break. It's been a while. We need to take a break. I know we've been talking a lot, and you're all out there listening. If you want to chime in, or if you have any questions for Keod, 356-4509, 356-4510. We'll be right back. And we're back. This is Patty Roker. This is Parliament Street, and we have Keod Smith with us talking about another fight for Clifton, or a fight to maintain Clifton.
A fight to save Clifton
Another
again.
Fight to save Clifton again.
Save it again.
What needs to be done? They need to cede the seabed to the authority? Then?
Well, that's part of it.
I have to say this. As good as the National Trust is in many ways, I was disappointed at what happened in the Exuma Keys, because you have to understand, as we learned from Clifton, we learned so much from Clifton. I probably know more about finger canals than I ever want to know, and the algae growth in fingers. But as we learned from Clifton, when you dig anything underwater, as was done on the Aga Khan's Island, the silt that you stir up, just go dig something when you go to the beach, put a shovel in underwater and watch how the silt floats through the water. We saw it when they were doing Arawak Key out here, when they were doing the port and rebuilding Arawak Key and whatever they were doing. We saw the silt in the water. That is like suffocating to animals, to plant life under the water, to fish, to everything. That is very, very bad for them. And to allow or to not protest the Aga Khan doing that in a land and sea park, you figure, oh, he's only, how long does that take? It won't take long. But the silt that is stirred up can cause great problems. And I was disappointed to see that. And also to those of us who, well, let me put it this way. I remember an interview the Reverend C.B. Moss did during the fight for Clifton out there in Rawson Square on the way he felt about the National Trust during Clifton. And let us just say it wasn't real complimentary, because the National Trust did not come down on any side.
No,
I mean, because their silence was deafening.
Because the National Trust position then, unfortunately as it is still now, then the Bahamas National Trust tries to, in recent times, all the time really, but long time ago it was just overt, but they try to behave like the TNC, which is the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a big organization that, in short, what it does is it says it has to go in bed with the big corporations in order to get them to be environmentally friendly and to do the right thing.
And also to buy huge tracts of land that the Nature Conservancy
exactly.
does buy.
Does buy and own for the purpose of making money, and it's just a money-making thing. The Bahamas National Trust, because it was an F&M development and it was being controlled by persons who were in there for that purpose. Oh, we're talking about
Clifton. Okay.
Clifton now.
Right.
It was an F&M development. Made a determination not to do what was obvious it ought to do. And I remember Mr. Gary Lawson, who is the son-in-law of Lynn Holowesco, when he stood up,
he was executive director
along with his wife, Susan Lawson. And they had the statement essentially that, listen, we don't get caught up in these kinds of things. We simply just receive it and hold it. My words. But essentially that's the long and short of what he said. And it was disappointing because here it is, we were hoping that this statutory body that was designed for conservation would at least have something to say. Yeah. That's something to say to these people, no, you can't do that. And it never happened. For the time I spent as ambassador for the environment, I always tell Sam Duncombe, whenever I see her, I said, I know you must be proud of me. She said, yes, I am. She said, but you need to go a little further. Because she's going to push the thing.
Always.
But because the kind of things that I learned about the environment and how it's supposed to work, that I realized all of our agencies were failing. And this last couple of years ago, when we started talking about this whole thing about what was going on in this environmental thing that Dr. Earl DeVoe seemed to be connected all over the place to doing things that were reprehensible, and he was the Minister for the Environment. You know, and all of the things, people make hay of it, but there's some serious issues. The Aga Khan giving $1 million to the trust, then the Aga Khan turning around and getting a permission.
We're not. We don't want to dissuade anyone from giving money to the trust. But the juxtaposition of the donation and the permission were a little bit.
Listen. See, at the end of the day, I do believe, and I'm saying this now. What I'm saying, because there is a disappointment that, let me say publicly, that I am disappointed with my Progressive Liberal Party in government since May of last year. That I think I played a little bit of a role in helping to get there. That since we've come to office, it is almost a year, and I have heard nothing about what the government's intention is as it relates to the Exuma lands, particularly Belle Island. And the fact that what was allowed to be done ought not to have been done. And the fact that what I have heard and understood, unless I am wrong or been misled, that you have a commercial activity going on the Aga Khan's property, and not just simply a very wealthy man who just simply have a big tract of land and he has a huge boat that he wants to simply put his huge boat in this huge basin that he's created.
Now that's alleged because you don't have any proof of that.
I don't have any. No, I don't have any proof of nothing happening. I know what was done to the property.
Right.
But I'm saying
obvious.
I don't have any proof that nothing is going on in government to now rectify this or how it's being addressed. I don't have any.
No, you don't have any proof it's a commercial activity, do you?
No, the proof I have, or that I'm relying on, is the proof I got when I was doing my work back then.
Okay.
You know, you can't tell me that the kind of operation, the way you were doing, what you were doing, was not, in fact, commercial, as opposed to just simply your own. But that being as it may.
These people live on a little different scale.
But that being as it may, the point I'm making, though, is that when you come to these kinds of things, you have to be seriously committed. Mm-hmm. And that is the context within which I'm speaking when I talk about how Mr. Bacon and those who were around him, including Mr. Christie, was attempting to revise history. And this historical revisionism by Mr. Bacon, seconded by Mr. Christie, have reignited this flame in so many people as it relates to Clifton. And it is our job to ensure that they are not successful in erasing the self-awareness and the consciousness of our Bahamian people. And there may be some of those, as I think I started to mention before, who may mistakenly believe that this resurgence of Clifton consciousness, that it will go away if you have some of these people come and wax their eloquence in the public domain. This is now fixed. We are ready to go. And when you know, Patty, when it is that you awaken people, or when you awaken the people, inevitably they remain aware. Mm-hmm. And in this kind of fight, they will remain aware. And in their awareness, they will arrive at a bright, new, and voluminous consciousness, which sort of makes for a new vibrancy and creative civic mindset. And that is the kind of thing that I am hoping that we will get now and we will keep as we move toward making sure that the world will hear our story. And we have to have that. We have to have people who are writers. We have to find all the persons who are eminent Bahamians who have left the Bahamas essentially, not because they don't want to be here, but because the degree of their knowledge and ability is such that it's unfortunately beyond where we are now in terms of our development. The late Paul Adley, I can't remember his daughter's name, the one
Roseanne, Dr. Roseanne
yes,
Adderley.
and she is a known, very high-level qualified African professor.
Yeah.
And people like her, for example, let's grab, not because she's Paul Adley's daughter, but because she is what she is in her own right.
Very qualified.
For her to be involved with something like this, for us to grab a hold of Dr. Laura Wilkie and Dr. Paul Farnsworth and ask them to come back, for us to turn the whole of this area into a whole archaeological site. You watch TV on the National Geographic Channel, and they have been excavating and looking at and overturning and brushing dirt and rock away in Egypt for the last hundreds and hundreds of years,
right.
and still have not found everything. And so we need to do this. And a part of it is what I am now focusing on, is to find the right way in which to achieve that. And to do my best to encourage as many people as possible to be involved with that part of the fight. So we have people like your young producer here, and others like my daughter, who is now 21, who would not necessarily know unless I tell her.
Yeah,
and my children, my younger ones, the 7 and 11-year-old, I mean, they would not know, and I believe they may be sitting listening now, and they've been out to Clifton because I've made it a point, as my duty is to them, to take them there and to see it. But unless they knew all of these many details written in children book form, for example, so that they can learn from day one of the importance of this and put it into context, not by people who are there and people who we have there to do this. And so for Mr. Bacon to stand on one side of him, you have Mayor Bloomberg, who is presenting him with the award.
Yeah.
Mayor Bloomberg, he owns one of the wire services on which news travels all over the world. Mayor Bloomberg would not know what I'm talking about.
No.
Because he's going to think that Bacon is not a man who's going to say something that's not true.
That's right.
So his news wire, because they will be following him, if nobody else, will say, Bacon said this thing about Clifton. Bacon actually said that Mr. Christie, who is his newest buddy now, Mr. Bacon spent a lot of money and let me not say he spent a lot of money, let me not go that far. But I know Mr. Bacon certainly was against Mr. Perry Christie becoming Prime Minister in 2012.
Really?
My intelligence is very solid and clear on that. But he was speaking glowingly about Perry Christie in New York at the Audubon Society Award. And at the Audubon Society Award, he says, Mr. Christie rode the Clifton fight into government in 2002.
Wow.
And so he's saying,
in
I
effect,
led it, and I brought this man into office.
Yeah, no.
And then he's standing now a few months, Patty, after the last election, to almost indirectly suggest that this man is in office even today because of me. And so and then when you have those kinds of problems, there's nothing wrong with anybody helping the PLP, the FNM to become government.
He certainly
and
nobody could do it without
only
him.
Perry Christie will know who sat with him and gave him advice or whatever. But when you start to look at it a little deeper and you start to see the connectors, meaning noun, meaning I'm talking about people who connect people behind the scene, you'll be very surprised. I can save that kind of talk for later.
Talk some and keep some.
But I can tell you something though, Patty. Sorry to cut you off again. That it is very, very important for us to understand that there is a move afoot to take away from this grassroots movement which was started, which we should all, I say, even those who were against it, we should all be proud of it. Because the politicians, like say, for instance, Mr. Tommy Turnquest, he should, as a Bahamian, be proud. See, he's in a battle. He knows that he could win it or he could lose it. And even in losing, you're supposed to be gracious. And he would know, even though that, technically speaking, the effort being made then was lost to the persons who were opposed to it, he would say, democracy worked. Our country is alive and vibrant.
The one thing, too, I think, that to have somebody like Mr. Bacon, who is, as you say, not a Bahamian and has a great deal of wealth, even attempt to take credit, it kind of discourages young Bahamians.
And the average person.
The average person.
Small man.
From understanding that this was a movement of the average person.
Or that they could make a difference in the next fight that may happen when you and I are long gone.
Exactly. And that they should, this is what made this such a beautiful thing, is that as did Montague Foreshore and Goodman's Bay, it was ordinary, regular people who came out and by their presence said, no, this is wrong, and made a change. And by that, and that same feeling is discouraged if you think, well, I guess I didn't really make a change. It must have been that rich guy.
You know how long, Patty, and we talk about the threats and all that. You know how long I walked around with people, the people who were against what we were doing, calling me. See, he's just a part of the tyrannical minority.
Yeah,
remember the term
tyrannical minority
that Mr. Chaffin gave to us, and was being repeated.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day,
thought of that in years,
these are the kinds of things that our people need to understand, that there was this is not about Code Smiths. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I'm not here because no one heard me talk about Clifton for all these 14 years because I never thought it was about me. But I feel that I'm driven to the point to stand in the gap and to make sure people know that this fire ain't going out. For as long as I am alive, I will continue to champion the cause that I know our people championed. And when I am gone, my son will know that it is his duty to continue that.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do it, and this is the African way, not taking anything from the British way or European way, the African way is that your heritage, your family, you are required to carry your history. You know, there were times in certain African societies that when you say, this is Code Smith, you have to go through the whole of my ancestry. Code Smith, the son of David Smith, the son of David Smith, the son of Darko Smith, straight on down the line.
Because all of those make up who you are.
Makes me who I am.
That's right.
And that's why it is so important that you know who you are on that point. And I think your producer is suggesting there may be someone on the air.
Yeah, we have a caller. Yeah.
But I'll just say just before, on that point, Patty, I learned some things about Clifton during the Clifton fight that explained to me why I felt this passion just to be involved with it. The people who were enslaved on the Clifton plantation predominantly went to two islands after Mr. Wiley left and went to St. Kitts. He didn't take his slaves to St. Kitts with him. They went to Andros and Crooked Island.
Oh, were they?
And Crooked Island is where my mother comes from.
Yeah.
And in my history, my family tree, going back to my great-great-great-grandfather, who was an African slave that came from Cuba. His name, when he came to Crooked Island, he came with one name. The name was Baracoa. And you know, there's a place called Baracoa in Cuba.
Yes.
If you look at Baracoa, where it is directly due south. So he would have gone directly due north, following the North Star.
Yeah.
Directly due north, come straight into what would have been Treasure Island or Long Key. And then into Landrel Point. Fortune Island, sorry. And then into Landrel Point and then into the land.
Yeah.
He married a woman who was from in Crooked Island at the time, and her name was Diana Moss. And Diana Moss, he took her name. Their children, right on down to my cousin, who is still alive today. Every generation from them, but not including the two of them, but their children and so on down. Every generation, the oldest male child has the name Clifton. The last Clifton, who has the name Clifton in it, well, not the last, because his son is a junior, and you know the name, and you'll be surprised. His name is Doswell Clifton Coakley.
Got to be.
Who served for about 35 years in government, and who actually served as a consular general in New York for the Bahamas.
He was a senator for a while here.
No. He ran for office.
Oh, okay.
Doswell Coakley, my first cousin, is the son of Muriel Barnaby. Father Muriel Barnaby.
Yeah.
All right? I'm just talking on his father's side. And Muriel Barnaby is the son, one of the children, of Jane Barnaby, who was a Ferguson.
See, now
and through that heritage, all the way back to Barracoa. And Clifton. It was not known. I remember saying, as I was talking to my mother, and my mother, this is when my mother was alive, and she said, Clifton, she said, and she started telling me the names of the people of Clifton. I said, so let me ask you this. I said, how is it and why is it you all decided on Clifton? That's a strange name for Croker Island. She said, well, I can't tell you why for sure, but I can tell you this, that my mother, meaning my mother's my grandmother, your grandmother insisted, hear what I say now, insisted that Doswell, who was a product of non-marriage, and this is all known, that he had to carry the name Clifton. There was nothing else. She would accept this child who was the child of her son, who she was looking up to, who was moving up. He was at St. John's College at the time and all the rest of that he had to carry the name Clifton. That was her oldest grandchild, and he had to carry it. And so when she spoke that to me, and I started looking back, and I was in the midst of the Clifton fight, I said, gee, this thing got a little connection, perhaps, I say, to me. And I didn't even know it. So I say that to say, how could I let Mr. Bacon take credit from my ancestry and all of the people going back to Barracoa to say that one of the descendants of Barracoa remembered, he was touched by us, so that he would know that when he was driving in that little Ford Escort around in Nassau, and he didn't realize until he almost was there, oh, gee, I'm all the way out this way. I might as well go to this town meeting. That was true, because I was listening to the thing on the radio. Yeah. So my ancestors, I really, truly believe, drove me there, because I had no intention on wanting to go to that. I wasn't into those people talking nonsense. And so all of this thing, I cannot sit back and allow Mr. And just like I could make my connection, that's why I told you, I don't know why it was that Vivian was my inspirator. Vivian was my inspirator to be involved. And so all of that, I say, is that we must now regroup. We must redefine the mission to save Clifton. We must write the story. We must get Bahamians involved in appreciating Clifton and its legacy, not just simply the fact of saving it, but what it was all about. And we must not allow expatriate people, just because they have money, to come and to take the idea. Usurp is a correct word. Usurp from us what is something that should make up the fabric of what makes Bahamians Bahamians.
There was plenty of credit for everybody in that Clifton fight. Yes, plenty of blame and plenty of credit. Yes. Well, we have one caller. That's Critical Thinker. Hey, Critical Thinker.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing, Patty?
Good.
And how you doing, Mr. Coach-Smith?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoy your passion. And I truly appreciate that, even when you and I discussed the Grand Bahama Port Authority.
Yes.
It's another issue that's on the drawing board.
Yes.
But as Bahamians, we must begin to preserve who we are. If we allow somebody else to tell our story, we'll definitely have a story different from what has occurred. And just put it in perspective. It's amazing that I didn't see, as I listened for the 10 years I've been home, to some of the Bahamians who would actually fight for the revisionist history that they have been told, in spite of the evidence that is there. I reflect on Mr. Roker, Mr. Loftus Roker, just speaking on the independence of the Bahamas and this majority rule day, and the trolls and the surrogates that just took to attacking him and his position and his health and everything else, when he was one that was sitting at the table just on a statement that contradicted to what they were being told, as opposed to what actually happened. I appreciate the fight that you're bringing back to the forefront. I've heard so much about it being absent during the time it occurred, but it makes empirical sense for us to move to preserve not only this, but all the things that we consider Bahamian are part of our history. You talk about the international community. Bahamians themselves have to recognize, with all due respect, that the gentleman Bacon didn't do anything extraordinary. He simply put together a proposal that most Bahamians now in this new information age can put forth and even create a 501c in the United States to accomplish some of the very same goals that these expatriates or whatever may come into the Bahamas and want to present to us as if though they're bringing some sort of uniqueness to us or financial empowerment, because there are organizations around the world that is looking to preserve in its purity the historical significance of information.
Yes.
And I encourage your fight, and I would tell you that I am going to be with you, standing with you, and all of those that's available, putting whatever information and years of experience that I have had from my global involvement and travels involvement, making sure that the correct information and the correct message go out, as well as the correct resources is tapped into to preserve not only this, but all things Bahamian, going back to when the Bahamas was
But you know, critical thinker, before you hang up, I would want to say that a person such as yourself, with the knowledge that I have of you, especially from your technological, seriously advanced ability, much, much more. And in fact, you were on the top of the game, if I could use that word, of technology development in the world before we all thought about this. The internet was just a dream kind of thing, almost teleporting people. But people like yourself who have a peculiar, not just knowledge, but also interest in making sure things get right. You may not hear from me a lot, but I follow all of what you've been doing, and a lot of what you do, obviously, it is your kind of person. I am certain that if you were here between 1998 and 2000, I know you would have been involved.
Oh, yeah.
And it is something, certainly, that your abilities can assist us in this modern age. I am just trying to understand the Facebook kind of thing now, and I remember that it took me, when someone sent me an email maybe about 6-7 years ago, and at the end they put LOL, I thought that it might have been a little squiggle or just shaking of the hand, and it took me a couple of years to figure out what LOL meant, and so but the point is that, but I know that critical thinker, maybe he's older than I am, but I know that he knew because he's in that world. But this is a new age. We need to get the information out. Patty, if I may able to say, I know that some of the pieces and commentaries that I've written is on my Facebook page now. The last interview that I had on the platform, which is on JCN, is also on YouTube, and you can access it obviously through my Facebook. If it is that you all permit me to, then we will get the tape of this, and that will be put up, because this is a different kind of fight. And critical think I really would like to ask for you to assist as much as you can. I know you're between Grand Bahama and here, but to make sure it all comes to fruition.
I absolutely would, and this has become high on my agenda. I saw the piece on JCN, and I was trying to, reassimilate myself with the information to find out exactly what's going on. Today provide a complete avenue for me to come to a better understanding of that. And I will definitely be reaching out to you again. I have your contacts.
Yes.
And it's because what happens is, Patty, we are experiencing a new awakening in the Bahamas, where information and where you used to just could tell us anything, but now we could authenticate and verify. And we have, and what the beauty about this part is we still at the cups, because a lot of the people for the information we need are still alive.
Thank
and those individuals that seek to distort what really happened may try to separate us from us. But I do believe that this, as well as other issues, will shape and reform the new Bahamas, knowing who we are. Because if you don't know where you are, where you came from, then you really don't know how to put in context where you need to go.
Yes.
I do believe that we are going to become a better country. And Keod, I will definitely be reaching out to you within the next 24 hours, and you look for my email or Facebook,
Excellent.
whatever.
Please do. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
So
Patty,
we need to take a quick break.
Sorry.
When we come back, we will wrap up, and you'll let us know what your next move is going to be. We'll be right back. And here we are. So what's next? Seriously, you have the fire rekindled.
Just before we said it, I'll say just quickly that critical thinker also brought up another point. And just to show him that I know and to let the world out there understand that what he said was true, and that is, he said, almost anyone in the Bahamas could create a 501c3, which is the kind of qualified company to make certain things happen. And let me just tell you that the BSCA, which I'm involved with from inception, that is the Bahamas Sports Fishing and Conservation Association. Mr. Prescott Smith, who is the founder.
Yes, of course.
He and Joel Moxie. I'm the founding attorney, if you will. I'm a founding member.
Okay.
And we have that qualification.
Okay.
So that we can get assistance. And recently you would have seen that the Deputy Prime Minister attended Andros, where Mr. Perkins from a company out of the United States is intending to help to fund certain things we want to do. So we can find, and we have the knowledge and the wherewithal to make these things happen as a people. But we must now, Patty, now that this fire has been rekindled, not just rekindled, I mean it's ignited, it's ablaze.
Yes, it is.
We must now regroup and redefine the mission to Save Clifton. And a great part of that is we must write the story. We must write the story. The story not just about the legacy of Clifton in terms of its historical significance to the pre-Columbian presence and all those and things to do with slavery, etc. But we have to write the story of Clifton, the struggle as well.
Yeah.
And we have to keep it going. We have to get Bahamian peoples involved in appreciating Clifton and the legacy which it has, and not just let this very valuable piece of history that that fell into our laps at this stage of our existence, not let it become the focal point of expatriate wealthy people just because they have the money, when in fact what we do have is we have the achievement, which is a part of the crowning glory, and that is we have the statute, the Clifton National Heritage Authority Act of 2004, Patty, did not happen just because one day Mr. Perry Christie woke up and said he was going to make this happen, or that anybody else. That was one of the road endings in this battle. And there was a lot that went on, a lot, from many people. Maybe Mr. Bacon was involved. We don't know. But he certainly is not entitled to claim that it would not have happened had it not been for him. Now, those are my words, but essentially that's what he said. And that amounts to a total out-and-out lie. And I cannot and will not allow that to stand. And I will challenge Mr. Bacon at any time, at any place, on that and those facts. And we have to discourage people from doing things such as this. And we at the same time must encourage our people to not allow people like this to do these kinds of things.
People have to know the story.
And
that's right,
so
back to them.
This is it. And so I want to just awaken everyone, encourage them, at least for the moment, to go on my Facebook. And if there's an error or something, please forgive me. I'm just getting technically savvy enough. But that being as it may, we have people involved who are helping, just kidding around, but we have people involved who are helping to make sure the information gets out. All of my colleagues, they are talking with me, discussing with me. Of course, for me, I will come out and deal with it and do it. Mr. Vivian Wiley, I know, is very upset at the fact that this is being rewritten, and almost that he is being rewritten out of it. I've not been able to catch up with Dr. C.B. Morse. I've been able to speak with Sam Duncombe, who is herself incensed. I can say that much. But again, this is the role for me to play at this stage. No one knows what role I will play next week or the week after or next month.
Yeah.
But certainly, if it were for me, the fire will not go out. And we will come to some successful conclusion in this whole thing. And I want to encourage people to get involved, read up on it. We have a lot of information.
There's
We're
a
putting
book.
it all together. And we will be looking at how to go about it and the possibilities and the things associated with raising the resources, not just money resources, people resources to tell the story.
Yeah.
And the story is going to be told in such a way that the World Wide Web now can bring to the world. And so you checkmate the Bacons of this world.
There is a book that Dr. Laurie Wilkie and Dr. Paul Farnsworth wrote, whose name escapes me. It's something about, it isn't cooking in many pots, but anyway, it's about their excavations at Clifton and what they found. It's it's kind of technical, but it isn't unreadable. It's a very interesting book, and I'm sure it's here at the library.
And they have to be brought back.
Yeah.
This is something, what Mr. Christie ought to be doing is finding the resources to bring the archaeologists back in here and to put it there and challenge people like me, Mr. Christie, to help to find the financial wherewithal so that the government of Bahamas that has limited resources would not have to worry about these people doing their work. And let's get them in place. They are willing to do it. They're prepared to do it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard it here. Clifton Fight goes on to make sure it never slips backward. That's the biggest.
It's 2.0, if you would.
2.0, Clifton 2.0. Listen to him. He's so technologically aware. Yes, Clifton 2.0.
Oh, politically.
Anyway, Google it. There's a lot of stuff on the web. Like I say, Laurie Wilkie and Paul Farnsworth have a book on it. Not on the fight for Clifton, but on the history of Clifton, which is very interesting, actually. And we will see what happens. And you'll be back with me, I'm sure, if something happens.
Yes. Patty, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. You know what this means to me. Anyway, and Alex is Googling it and looking at all the pictures of what they would have liked to have done to that place. And there is no Clifton Key. That's what they wanted to call it, but we stopped that. Yes. There is now just Clifton. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Tune in next week when my guests will be Nicole Martin and the A-Team, the folks who are running for leadership of the hotel union, I think. It's hard to tell from day to day if that's ever going to go off. But anyway, we believe there's going to be an election, and they'll be with me next week. Stay tuned now for Malcolm McKay and Island Classics, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.